Ma'am, step off the bike and keep your hands where I can see them. The command cut clean through the hum of the engine, sharp and practiced, the kind of voice that expected obedience before understanding. Naomi Carter didn't flinch. The red and blue lights behind her painted the asphalt in restless waves, reflecting off the black carbon frame of her Superbike, off the glossy visor that hid her eyes, off the chrome details that still ticked softly with heat from the ride. She had been doing 65 down a 45 just minutes ago, the wind pressing hard against her chest, the road stretching empty and endless under the Tennessee night. A rare moment of silence after 16 straight hours of work. Now the silence was gone, replaced by the low growl of patrol engines and the quiet tension that settles when something shifts from routine to assumption. Naomi eased the bike into neutral, her gloved hands steady on the grips, her posture relaxed in a way that didn't match the urgency surrounding her. Gravel crunched under boots approaching from behind. I said step off the bike. Slowly. Another voice this time, firmer, closer. Naomi tilted her head slightly, enough to register the position of the officer in her peripheral vision without turning fully, without escalating, without giving them anything that could be misread. She swung one leg over, boots landing softly against the pavement, the engine still idling beneath her like a restrained heartbeat. The night air was cooler now, brushing against the back of her neck where her helmet didn't quite seal, carrying with it the faint scent of motor oil and dry grass. She raised her hands just enough to be visible, not exaggerated, not defensive, just present. A second cruiser rolled up, tires hissing against the road, doors opening almost in unison. More footsteps, more eyes. Naomi could feel them scanning her, not just the bike, not just the speed, but her posture, her stillness, the quiet confidence that didn't fit the narrative already forming in their minds. License and registration, the first officer said, his tone clipped, already edged with something heavier than procedure. Naomi nodded once, slow, deliberate. It's in the saddle compartment, she replied, her voice calm, even, carrying no resistance and no apology. There was a pause, brief but noticeable, as if her tone alone had disrupted the rhythm they expected. Don't reach for anything yet, he added quickly. We'll get it. Naomi's hands remained where they were, fingers slightly spread, the leather of her gloves catching the flicker of the patrol lights. In the distance, a car slowed, then another, headlights drifting past like quiet witnesses unwilling to stop. Somewhere nearby, a phone camera clicked on. Naomi could hear it, the faint shift in breathing, the subtle repositioning of weight, the unspoken agreement forming between the officers that this was no longer just a traffic stop. The world narrowed to small details, the pulse of light across the road, the soft ticking of her cooling engine, the steady rhythm of her own breath. She had been in louder rooms, tenser moments, places where one wrong move meant everything falling apart. This wasn't that. Not yet. But it was close enough to feel familiar. Turn around, the officer said. Naomi did. Slowly. Precisely. No hesitation, no resistance. Just compliance wrapped in something they couldn't quite name. The kind of calm that didn't come from fear, but from knowing exactly where the line was, and exactly who was standing on the wrong side of it. The metal of the cruiser reflected across Naomi's visor as she turned, the world behind her dissolving into fractured streaks of red and blue, her hands still lifted, steady, controlled, the kind of stillness that did not come from submission, but from discipline learned over years where control meant survival, not compliance. And as she faced the hood of the patrol car, she caught her own faint reflection in the glass, a silhouette more than a person, reduced in their eyes to a moment, a label. A quick decision made too early and held too tightly. And somewhere in that reflection was the echo of a different night, a different room, fluorescent lights humming overhead, while a senior agent once told her that the most dangerous thing was not aggression but assumption, that people would decide who you were before you ever spoke. And Naomi had learned then to let the moment stretch, to let the truth arrive on its own time. Her breathing slow and measured as cool air slipped beneath her helmet and brushed against her skin, grounding her, anchoring her in the present as footsteps shifted closer and closer until she could hear the faint creak of leather and the soft static of a radio clipped to a shoulder. You have anything on you we need to know about? The officer asked, his voice lower now, but still firm, still certain, and Naomi shook her head once, small, precise. "No, sir," she said, her tone even, respectful without yielding anything deeper, because she knew the weight of tone, knew how quickly a single word could be twisted into something else, into resistance, into attitude, into justification. And she had no intention of giving them that. Not tonight. Not. Here, a second officer moving to her side, circling slightly as if mapping her presence against the scene, as if trying to reconcile the calm in her posture with the narrative already forming in his mind. "You were going over the limit back there," he added, almost as if searching for something solid to hold on to, something procedural to anchor what had already drifted beyond routine. Naomi nodded again. "Yes, sir." No excuses, no elaboration, just acknowledgement, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of uncertainty in the air, subtle but real, like a shift in pressure before a storm changes direction. A passing car slowed again, headlights lingering longer this time, illuminating the scene in a wash of pale white that cut through the red and blue and revealed more than anyone intended. The sleek lines of the bike, the quiet steadiness of her stance, the absence of anything threatening beyond perception itself. And then the light moved on, leaving them again in the artificial pulse of authority. The first officer exhaling softly, almost inaudibly, as if recalibrating. "We are going to check your information," he said, his words measured now, careful in a way they had not been before, and Naomi simply nodded, her hands still raised, her body still composed, her silence no longer empty, but filled with something heavier, something patient, like a clock ticking just out of sight. And as the radio crackled to life with distant voices and coded phrases that meant nothing to the passing world but everything to those who understood, Naomi's eyes remained forward, unfocused on any single point, because she knew this moment was not about what she said next, but about what they had already decided, and how long it would take for that decision to unravel on its own. The radio on the officer's shoulder crackled again, sharper this time, a burst of coded dispatch chatter that briefly cut through the stillness before fading into static, and Officer Daniel Brooks tilted his head slightly as he listened, his jaw tightening in a way that suggested more than routine, his posture rigid under the wash of flashing lights, his eyes returning to Naomi with a sharper edge now, not louder, not aggressive, just more certain, like a decision had already settled into place somewhere behind his gaze. "We are going to run everything again," he said. Slower this time, deliberate, as if reinforcing control not just for her, but for himself. And Naomi remained still, her hands still raised, her shoulders relaxed, her presence unchanged, because she had seen this before, that subtle shift when a moment stopped being about facts and started being about authority, and the second officer stepped back toward the cruiser, the door opening with a hollow click. The glow of the onboard computer lighting his face in pale blue as he began typing, fingers moving quickly, scanning, searching, confirming something that did not yet exist in the system they trusted more than their own judgment. And Brooks took a step closer to Naomi, not invading, not threatening, but close enough that his voice did not need to carry far. "Where are you coming from tonight?" he asked, the question simple but weighted, and Naomi answered without hesitation. "Work, sir," her tone steady, grounded, the word carrying more truth than explanation, and he nodded once, though it did not soften his expression. "What kind of work?" he pressed, and there it was, the line she recognized, the quiet expectation that she would either hesitate or over-explain, that she would reveal something that fit the version of her already forming in his mind. But Naomi did neither. "Federal work," she said, clear, calm, no emphasis, no attempt to convince. Just a statement placed gently into the air between them. And for a brief second the night seemed to hold its breath. Brooks' eyes narrowing slightly, not in disbelief but in recalculation, the kind that happens when a narrative does not immediately align with the information presented, and behind him the other officer glanced up from the screen, his fingers pausing mid-motion, as if the words had reached him too, rippling outward through the scene in a way no one acknowledged directly. "Federal," Brooks repeated, quieter now, testing the word as if it might reveal something more if he said it again. And Naomi gave a small nod. Nothing more, her visor still down, her face unreadable, her posture unchanged, and the silence stretched just long enough to become noticeable, long enough for the distant hum of passing traffic to return, for the faint chirp of insects in the nearby grass to fill the edges of the moment, for the weight of assumption to begin pressing against something harder, something less flexible than it had been a minute ago, and Brooks exhaled slowly, shifting his stance just slightly, his hand dropping away from his belt, not relaxed but no longer as rigid. "Do you have any identification on you?" he asked, and Naomi responded the same way she had from the start, steady, composed. "Yes, sir. It is in the saddle compartment." And again that pause returned, but this time it carried something different, not control, not certainty, but the first faint trace of doubt, subtle and quiet, like a hairline crack, forming beneath the surface of something that had seemed solid just moments before. The compartment latch clicked softly as the second officer moved toward the bike, his steps slower now, more deliberate, as if the simple act of retrieving identification had suddenly become something heavier than procedure, and Naomi lowered her hands only when instructed, her movements controlled and precise, each motion measured in a way that made it clear she understood the weight of being watched, the weight of being interpreted, and she stepped back just enough to give space, not retreating, not asserting, just existing within the narrow boundary they had drawn around her. The officer kneeling slightly beside the bike, gloved fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second before opening the saddle compartment, the interior light flickering on and casting a pale glow over neatly arranged contents, a folded document sleeve, a small toolkit, nothing excessive, nothing out of place, and he reached in, pulling out the sleeve with careful fingers, as if expecting something unexpected, something that would confirm what they had already decided, and as he stood, he glanced briefly at Brooks, a silent exchange passing between them, quick and unreadable to anyone else, but unmistakable in its tension, and Brooks gave a small nod, his eyes fixed on Naomi, not hostile, not aggressive, but searching now, looking for something that had not been there before, something that did not align with the certainty he had carried just minutes ago. The officer opened the sleeve slowly, the sound of paper shifting soft against the quiet night, and for a moment no one spoke, the world narrowing again to small details, the hum of engines, the distant rustle of leaves, the faint buzz of a streetlight overhead, and then his posture changed, subtle but undeniable, his shoulders tightening, his grip adjusting, his eyes scanning the contents again, slower this time, more carefully, as if the words on the page required confirmation, and Brooks took a step closer. "What is it?" he asked, his voice lower now, not demanding, but edged with something that had not been there before, something closer to uncertainty, and the officer did not answer immediately, his gaze still locked on the identification in his hands, his brow faintly furrowed as he read, reread, processing, and then he looked up, not at Naomi, but at Brooks, holding the document just slightly higher, enough for him to see, enough for the moment to shift again, and Brooks leaned in, his eyes scanning quickly, his expression tightening in a way that did not match the confidence he had carried earlier, the air between them changing, the space no longer defined by control, but by realization creeping in slowly, quietly, like a shadow stretching across the ground. And Naomi stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, watching without watching, allowing the moment to unfold without interference, because she understood something they were only beginning to feel, that truth did not need volume, it did not need force, it only needed time. And Brooks straightened slowly, the document still in his hand now, his grip firm but no longer certain, his eyes returning to Naomi with a different weight, one that carried recognition not of who she was fully, but of how wrong the moment had become, and for the first time, since the lights had appeared behind her, the silence was not theirs to control, it belonged to something else entirely, something heavier, something that could not be undone as easily as it had been created. The weight of the moment settled unevenly, like air pressure shifting before a storm, and Officer Brooks did not speak right away, his eyes lingering on the identification in his hand. A second longer than necessary, as if reading it again might somehow change what it already said, but it did not, it only stayed the same, clear, official, undeniable, and when he finally looked up at Naomi, The authority that had filled his posture minutes ago no longer sat the same way on his shoulders. It had not disappeared, but it had cracked, just enough to let something else through, something quieter, less certain. And the second officer took a small step back without realizing it, his stance no longer squared, his focus shifting between Brooks and Naomi as if waiting for direction that had not yet arrived. And the patrol lights continued their endless rotation, red, blue, but now they felt different, less like control and more like exposure, illuminating not just the scene but the mistake forming inside it. And Brooks cleared his throat softly, a small sound that carried more weight than any command he had given earlier. "Ma'am," he began, the word landing. Differently this time, slower, more careful, no longer an instruction but something closer to acknowledgement. And Naomi did not move, did not respond immediately. She simply stood there, her posture still grounded, her presence steady, allowing him the space to finish what he had started, to step into the reality that had already begun to unfold. "I am going to need you to confirm this," he added, though the request sounded less like procedure and more like hesitation, as if he already knew the answer but needed to hear it spoken, needed something external to anchor what was shifting internally. And Naomi reached up slowly, her fingers moving to the edge of her helmet, pausing for just a fraction of a second before lifting it off in one smooth motion, the cool night air brushing across her face as she revealed herself fully for the first time, her expression calm, composed, her eyes steady and direct, not confrontational, not forgiving, just present. And she met his gaze without effort, without strain. "Agent Naomi Carter," she said quietly, her voice even, carrying the same calm it had held from the beginning. But now the words carried context, weight, something that settled into the space between them and reshaped it entirely. And Brooks' jaw tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in recognition, the kind that comes when a situation moves beyond control and into consequence. And behind him the radio crackled again, distant voices continuing their rhythm, unaware that the ground had shifted here, that something small had become something significant. And the second officer lowered his gaze briefly, then looked back up, his expression no longer searching but understanding, the pieces now aligning in a way that could not be undone. And Naomi placed the helmet at her side, her hand resting lightly against it, her posture unchanged, because for her the moment had not shifted, it had only revealed itself, and she had been standing in that truth from the start, waiting, not for permission, not for validation, but for them to see what had always been there. And the silence that followed was no longer tense, no longer uncertain. It was heavy, settled, filled with the quiet realization that authority, when misplaced, does not disappear quietly. It leaves a mark that lingers long after the lights fade. The night seemed to slow, as if even the air understood something irreversible had just settled into place. And Naomi stood there with her helmet resting lightly against her hip, her fingers relaxed, her breathing even, the faint glow of the streetlight catching the edge of her cheekbone and holding it there, soft and steady. While Officer Brooks did not move for a long second, his posture caught between what he had been and what he now understood, the identification still in his hand no longer a question but a confirmation. And when he finally shifted, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, a small adjustment of his stance, a quiet release of tension that had been driving his actions moments before. And he glanced down briefly, not at the ground, but at the space between them, as if recalibrating where he stood in relation to her now. And the second officer turned slightly away, giving them distance without being told, his earlier certainty replaced by a careful awareness that something larger than the stop itself had unfolded. And the patrol lights continued their steady rhythm. But the meaning behind them had changed, no longer a symbol of control, but a reminder of how quickly control can misalign with truth. And Brooks inhaled slowly, the sound almost lost beneath the hum of engines, before speaking again, his voice quieter, measured. "Agent Carter," he said, this time without hesitation, without doubt, the name landing fully formed. In the space between them, carrying respect that had not been there before. And Naomi met his gaze without shifting, without softening, not out of defiance but because there was nothing to adjust, nothing to prove. She had been consistent from the beginning, and consistency, in moments like this, carried its own weight. and Brooks nodded once, a small motion, controlled, acknowledging more than just her title, acknowledging the misstep that had brought them here, even if he did not yet have the words to fully address it. And the radio crackled again in the background, distant voices continuing their routine, unaware that something more important than procedure had just taken place on this quiet stretch of road. And a car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping across them, illuminating the scene in a brief, clear wash of white that showed everything plainly. The officers, the bike, Naomi standing centered and still, no longer framed as a question but as a presence that had always been there, waiting to be seen correctly. And as the light moved on, the shadows returned, softer now, less sharp, as if the tension itself had begun to dissolve, and Brooks shifted his weight again, this time more naturally, his shoulders settling, his voice steady but no longer edged. "You are free to go," he said, the words simple, but carrying more than release, carrying recognition. And Naomi did not move immediately, not out of hesitation, but because moments like this required stillness, required space for what had just happened to fully land. And she gave a small nod, once, acknowledging the statement without amplifying it, without turning it into something larger than it needed to be, because she understood that real shifts did not come from words alone. They came from what followed them, from what stayed behind after the moment passed. And as she lifted her helmet again, sliding it back into place with practiced ease, the quiet returned, deeper now, more complete, the kind that settles only after something has been understood, even if no one says it out loud. The helmet sealed into place with a soft click, the sound small but final, and for a moment Naomi did not move, her hands resting lightly on the grips as the world around her seemed to pause, the patrol lights still cycling in steady rhythm, but now they felt distant, like something already fading into the past. And she glanced once toward the road ahead, long and empty, stretching into darkness with quiet promise, before her gaze returned briefly to Officer Brooks, not lingering, not challenging, just a simple acknowledgement that the moment between them had changed in a way neither of them could undo. And Brooks stood there with his hands at his sides, the identification no longer in his grip, his posture no longer rigid but not entirely at ease either, caught somewhere between authority and reflection. And he shifted his weight slightly, the movement subtle, almost uncertain, as if the ground beneath him no longer felt as stable as it had just minutes before. And the second officer remained near the cruiser, watching without speaking, his earlier certainty replaced by something quieter, more aware, his eyes following Naomi not with suspicion now, but with recognition of something he had missed. And the radio on his shoulder crackled again, a distant call, routine, ordinary, but it did not pull them out of the moment. Not yet, because something unfinished still lingered in the air, something unspoken but present. And Brooks exhaled slowly, his breath visible for just a second in the cooler night air, before he spoke again, his voice lower than before, not commanding, not procedural, but human. "Agent Carter," he said, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just the weight of the name spoken correctly. And Naomi paused, her hand still on the throttle, her head tilting slightly in acknowledgement without turning fully, allowing him the space to continue if he chose to. And for a brief moment he did not, as if searching for the right words, the kind that could bridge what had happened with what he now understood. But the silence stretched, and in that silence the realization settled deeper than any explanation could reach, and he gave a small nod instead, more to himself than to her, accepting that not every moment could be corrected with language, that some things simply remained, carried forward in quiet awareness. And Naomi understood that too, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, because she had lived inside that understanding long before this night. And without another word she turned the key slightly, the engine responding with a low, controlled hum that vibrated through the frame of the bike and into the stillness around them, not loud, not aggressive, just present, like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. And the sound filled the space between them, replacing what words could not. And as she eased the bike forward, slow and deliberate, the tires rolling softly against the asphalt, Brooks stepped back instinctively, giving her space without being asked, the movement small but meaningful. And the patrol lights washed over her one last time, red, blue, before she passed beyond their reach, the glow sliding off the surface of her helmet and disappearing into the dark, and behind her the road closed quietly, leaving the officers standing in a silence that felt different now, heavier, more aware, as if the night itself had witnessed something they would not easily forget. The sound of the engine faded into the distance, not abruptly, but gradually, like something choosing to leave rather than escape. And Naomi kept her speed steady as the road opened ahead of her, the cool night air pressing lightly against her shoulders, the lines on the asphalt sliding beneath her wheels in a quiet rhythm that matched her breathing, controlled, even, unchanged, and behind her the flashing lights grew smaller, softer, until they were nothing more than a faint pulse against the dark horizon, and she did not look back, not because she could not, but because there was nothing behind her that needed to be revisited. The moment had already said everything it was meant to say, and as she rode, her mind did not replay the voices or the commands or the hesitation that followed. It did not need to, because she had learned long ago that moments like that were not isolated, they were patterns, quiet repetitions that appeared in different forms, different places, carried by different faces, and the only way to move through them was not with anger or resistance, but with clarity, with presence, with a kind of steadiness that could not be shaken by assumption. And the road curved slightly to the right, the city lights beginning to emerge in the distance now, faint at first, then clearer, like a horizon pulling her forward into something larger than the moment she had just left behind. And she adjusted her grip slightly, the movement instinctive, her body leaning with the curve, her focus narrowing to the space directly ahead, where control belonged to her again, fully, without question, and the hum of the engine beneath her felt different now, not because it had changed, but because the silence around it had, the absence of tension allowing the sound to settle into something almost grounding, and miles passed beneath her tires, measured not in numbers, but in the steady return of normalcy, the kind that comes after something has been disrupted and then quietly restored, and somewhere behind her, far enough now to feel like another place entirely, Officer Brooks remained standing near the cruiser, the echo of the moment still settling into his awareness, his gaze lingering on the empty stretch of road where Naomi had disappeared, not searching, not expecting her to return, but recognizing that something had shifted in a way he could not ignore. And the second officer leaned lightly against the side of the vehicle, arms folded, his expression thoughtful, the earlier certainty gone, replaced by a quieter understanding that would follow him beyond this night, into other stops, other decisions, other moments where assumption might try to take the lead again. And Brooks finally turned away from the road, his shoulders lowering slightly as he exhaled, a slow release that carried more than just the end of a shift, and he reached for the radio on his shoulder, his voice steady but changed in a way only he would notice, more measured, more aware, as he checked back in with dispatch, returning to routine while carrying something new beneath it, something unspoken but present. And the patrol lights continued to flash, though softer now, less urgent, as if even they understood that what had just happened was no longer about control, but about recognition, and the night settled back into its quiet rhythm, the kind that holds both movement and stillness at the same time. As Naomi rode forward into the city, and the officers stood behind, each carrying a different version of the same realization, one that would not announce itself loudly, but would remain, quietly shaping what came next. The city rose slowly ahead of her, not in a rush, but in layers of light that stretched across the horizon like a quiet invitation, and Naomi eased off the throttle just slightly as she approached the first set of traffic signals, the glow of red and amber reflecting across her visor in soft, shifting patterns, the rhythm of the road returning to something familiar, something steady, and she rolled to a smooth stop at the intersection, her boots touching down lightly against the pavement, the engine humming beneath her with a low, controlled energy that felt almost like breathing. And for a moment, everything was still again, not tense, not uncertain, just still, the kind of stillness that follows clarity, and she glanced briefly to her left, then to her right, the city moving around her in quiet motion, cars passing, headlights drifting, people, unaware of the moment she had just moved through, unaware of the weight it carried. And she did not need them to be, because moments like that were not meant to be witnessed by everyone. They were meant to be felt, carried, understood by those inside them. And as the light shifted to green, she moved forward again, smooth and controlled, merging into the flow of traffic without disruption, without drawing attention. Just another presence on the road, and behind her, miles away now, the patrol. Cars had gone dark, their lights turned off, the scene dissolved back into routine, but the echo of it remained, not in the air, not in the road, but in the people who had stood there and felt it change. And Officer Brooks sat inside his cruiser now, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, the engine idling, his reflection faint in the windshield as he stared ahead at nothing in particular, the radio quiet for the moment, giving him space he had not asked for but needed, and he replayed. The scene not in words, not in commands, but in fragments, the calm in her voice, the steadiness in her posture, the way the moment had shifted without force, without resistance, and he understood now, in a way he had not before, that authority without awareness was incomplete, that certainty without reflection could lead somewhere unintended, and he exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, before reaching up to adjust the rearview mirror, not because it needed adjusting, but because it gave him something to do, something small to anchor the larger realization settling inside him and outside. The night continued as it always did, indifferent, steady, carrying forward without pause, and Naomi rode deeper into the city, the lights growing brighter, the streets more alive. But her pace remained the same, unhurried, grounded, her presence unchanged, because what mattered was not the moment itself, but how it was held, how it was carried forward. And as she passed beneath a row of streetlights, each one casting a brief wash of gold across her path before fading behind her, the road ahead remained open, quiet, and certain, and she continued forward without looking back, leaving behind not just a place, but a lesson that did not need to be spoken to be understood, a silence that said everything clearly enough on its own.